Hi, my name is Dan Zeilinger, and I have been a world-traveling full-time trad jazz musician for the past 40 years. Some of my most memorable performances were on the lawn of the Edinburgh Castle, at Imperial Palace in Japan, as well as TV shows and commercials across the world. I've met many people during my career and have spent many hours on stage and off with these musicians, talking about jazz, life, and more. Some are touring musicians, some are theme park warriors, and some are casual musicians who play on the weekends with friends. I think they all have stories worthy of a movie script, and through these interviews, I'll be sharing them with you. Hi, this is Dan Zeilinger with Trad Jazz Today, and I am back for round two of a discussion with
Ding!
Mr. Matt Johnson again, because we had so much fun the first time that sometimes you just can't leave it alone. Even if somebody says it's done, you just go, no, I gotta get more of this, and that's exactly what happened in this case, right?
That's right. I've been asked to leave it alone more times than I want to remember. But yes, it just all went too fast. And as I was being self-conscious a moment ago, I wondered if anything I had to offer seemed interesting at all. But it just goes, and we're just going with the flow. Go.
No, it was great. I have several of these interviews where the musicians I'm talking to are also educators, and we spend so much time just talking about let me rephrase that. I spend so much time talking about my memories and things that have happened to me and the person I'm interviewing that I really don't mind enough of their knowledge, especially educators, because everybody. Speaking of which, there's something that you told me a very long time ago that I use to this day when I'm teaching drummers.
Oh.
And that is, please close the door.
Please close the door, close the door, close the door.
Which is the swing pattern on a right cymbal for basic right cymbal that you explain to drummers, so you're not sitting there on the blackboard writing out triplets and tying things together and trying to explain what the jazz feel is.
Right. That's one way people use to, relay that familiar rhythmic pattern. My father used to say, dang, duke, da dang, duke, da dang. It was just a funny thing that he said. But yeah, somebody said, please shut the door, shut the door. That's just some old timey call and response, right? I mean, there's actually a really cool poster that I've seen in some elementary schools that have different groupings of quarter, eighth, and 16th notes, and then they have pictures underneath them, like ham and eggs, or I can't, I would have to see it. But when you look at those pictures and you say those words, it is in fact, the common way of saying them does represent a particular rhythm. Anyway, it's a fun way of learning rhythms.
I'm a big fan of mnemonics. Is that what that's called? Of saying a sentence, for example, when I was at one of my high schools, I couldn't get a kid to play dotted quarter eighth. Boom, 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 boom. And I go, hey, give me some love. And he goes, what? I go, give me some love. And he said, ha, 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 and then played it perfect.
Yeah. I learned from Sal Lozano, Jack in the Box, to play the last 16th note of the beat. Jack in the Box, right?
But all these things are valuable because it's hard to explain a swing feel, and then once you teach them, it's hard to get them to stop it.
Well, I think what you're describing is it's hard for some people to make the physical connection via the notation, right? So to translate that script into a physical act in real time. I mean, that's.
Well, but the other thing is, of course, it depends on who's writing it. You have seen enough high school big band charts to know that when something is written by a drummer, drum part's written by a drummer or written by somebody who plays, tuba or something.
An arranger that plays a different instrument or something. Right. Yeah.
And it's really evident in their notation.
Yeah. And yes. It's a subject that's been very much on my mind lately. I'm actually writing an instructional book. I don't want to jinx it, but anyway, I'm working on a project and it's just weeks from being completed. But yeah, chart interpretation is a big part of that because and here's a weird thing that happens. It's not uncommon that at the middle school level, because the arranger assumes that they're not familiar with the fill concept, how to play a fill, how to play set up a big band figure, which is a whole clinic unto itself, and weeks and months of practice goes into being able to do that. So at the middle school level, they'll actually write out fills. They'll play all of these notes and it'll work with the rest of the band. And I have never seen a middle schooler who, one, doesn't have, that is, if they don't already understand the concepts of setting up the band, there's no way they can interpret that notated fill. So I spend a lot of time with my young drummers explaining and then demonstrating how to set up a band figure. And then in the chart, just write slashes, just play time.
Or a little thing that says fill.
Yeah, and right. And then just write the cue, write whatever the band rhythm you want them to set up. And then if they've been coached in how to anticipate that rhythm and set it up, it's way easier for them to learn than to try and decipher a complicated notated fill.
Yeah.
That is somebody else's idea of what, you know, it should be. So anyway, I have always found it frustrating that the middle school charts look more dense and are actually more difficult to interpret because of all the work that the arranger has put in to explain what they should play instead of just somebody explaining it. So anyway.
Or putting a recording on and say, you hear that? That's what he's doing there, you know.
Do that thing right there. Yeah.
Let's go all the way back to, I know actually there are quite not only young drummers on this that watch my channel, but there are also a lot of older drummers that need to hear some of the things I'm asking you. In particular, the first one is going to seem pedestrian maybe, but how important are just the rudimentals? And I don't mean rudiments. I mean basic drumming. How important is that to your development as a set player later on? You know, just learning Mama, Daddy, or whatever.
Yeah, drumming fundamentals as opposed to rudiments. Yeah, people interchange the word rudimental for rudimentary.
Yeah,
and I suppose the root word is the same, right? So it's basic components. But your question is how important is just basic drumming?
Hang on, let me put it in a little bit better frame.
Okay. I'll wait.
You've got a kid who sits down at the drum set at school and immediately goes into a hard rock backbeat, but doesn't know the first thing about a double stroke roll or anything.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Right. Well, if they go right into a rock and roll groove with a hard backbeat, to me, that says that they are able to convert a musical thought into a physical act, right? So to me, that's maybe somebody who I see has potential. So then there does need to be a little practice pad work. They don't really need to have a lot of the rudimental foundation that I grew up with necessarily if they're playing drum set. When it really comes into play is when they begin to play fills. Because as drum set players, we play anywhere from 2-to-1 to 4-to-1, right hand to left hand. If they're playing in a right, traditional right hand oriented drum set with a ride on the right, we play so many more times with our right hand that the left hand is not developed. So then when they begin to play fills around the drums, they don't have a balanced feel, neither orally or spatially. So having a little practice pad work with a metronome to balance their hands, which is something that you learn the very first time you take a drum lesson, to play balanced left to right. That helps there. The whole other end of the spectrum is take somebody who has grown up with a rudimental, formal rudimental training or even classical training, and has lots of chops and the ability to play, as we say, hand to hand, and then put them on the drum set, and all of a sudden, they sound like a tenor player going around the drums, which is not good either. So,
No, that was kind of the reason. I'm sorry. That was kind of the reason my senior year in high school, I ended up being the stage band drummer,
yeah,
and we had a whole band full of drum corps guys
yeah,
that couldn't coordinate their four limbs to
yeah,
work smoothly, and didn't
yeah,
have a concept.
yeah, yeah. So having an exposure to the music, you need all of the above. You need to have, a foundation. We talk about foundation, and it's you can't build a house without a foundation has been the analogy for a lot of pursuits, both musical and athletic, and playing drums is both. And so without some sort of formal foundation, both physical foundation as well as an understanding of the primary components, as well as the primary responsibility of the drummer. There are a lot of people who can, quote, play the drums, but they don't necessarily understand the primary role of the drummer. And so all of that needs to be internalized before you can,
Yeah.
hope to be effective.
How do you feel about the traditional grip versus match grip controversy?
Not an issue.
Not an issue. It doesn't matter.
No, I mean, you say the controversy. It's not, to me, it's not a controversy. I always like to explain to my students, well, when I teach at Fullerton College, I have 3 levels of, well, it's actually 4 levels, but I teach it in 3 classes of drum set studies. I have a drum set lab. I don't know if we talked about it last time, but I have, much like the piano lab of a generation ago, I actually have an electronic drum set lab. I have 12 electronic student drum kits, and they're all hooked to a network, and everybody wears headphones and a microphone, and I can play and demonstrate a concept, and then everyone can immediately start practicing it at their own pace and uninterrupted by anybody else.
As the instructor, you can choose which one of the sets to listen to.
Yeah, so I have a router, so I can
That's
I can
wonderful.
talk to everybody, and then I can have a discrete conversation with anybody individually, which is really great because a lot of times when people are learning something new, they get frustrated, and then when you're in a class setting, they can become embarrassed, and even just momentarily, it disrupts the learning process, right? Even if they're super confident people, if they play something, especially if they're super confident people, frankly, and then they play something that's frustrating, they're not able to do it, they just shut down. They don't know how to kind of move beyond that. So to be able to have a private conversation with someone and encourage them and tell them what I see them doing correctly, and or modify the lesson that will allow them to absorb the information. Part of what I do is during the assessment of the students, figure out what kind of learner they are. Some people you can just show something to and just go like that. Other people, you show it to them and they instinctively do something absolutely backwards, in reverse of what you're saying to them. So you kind of have to decode their ability to absorb the information and then tailor the lesson to them. But I got off on this jag because we're talking about traditional versus match grip. So for the beginners, I have an introductory level of drum set for college students that are typically music students that just are taking it as just cause. And I teach match grip. It's so much easier to show somebody that the left hand matches the right hand, and that they in a mirror can see themselves. And in order to get an even sound, you need to match the height and velocity of your stick. So it's just, from a teaching standpoint, it's so much better, because teaching traditional grip, is teaching two separate mechanical techniques. And so instead of teaching that, although I will coach anybody who wants to do it, but I explained to them the whole purpose. Dan Zeilinger, do you know the reason of the traditional grip? Do you know?
Absolutely. It has to do with the way the drums sit when you wear it with the sling.
Yeah. So when a drum was hung from a body on a single contact sling, and we're not talking 70s drum corps, we're talking 1770s revolutionary soldiers. I say soldiers, you know, drums was martial music. They
Oh, yeah.
usually had a kid out in front of all the troops, you know, here, send the kid out there to play drums while everybody shoots at him. But anyway, that drum hung off their body sideways. And so instead of playing with their elbow up, it was easier to take this underhanded grip. In fact, you still see it. The military groups, I think they're called the Hellcats, which is a great name, but there's a military drum line. And sometimes some of the drum corps will do like a retro thing where they'll hang their drums at an angle.
Well, there's that Swiss group too. I think they're called Top Gun or something, or
Yeah, that play with that.
that play
And some
Swiss rudiments. Yeah.
some organizations will even on a fixed harness will put their drum at an angle to accommodate that traditional grip. There are some popular drummers now on the scene. Bernie Dressel is the most I think visibly dramatic example of it. He plays with that with a really severe rake to his snare drum that is actually ergonomically accommodating his traditional grip.
Yeah.
And it's cool to look at.
Just
You
a fast aside here.
Yeah.
When I was teaching at Kennedy High School in La Palma, we did one of those trips that they do to Ireland. They do a trip to Ireland every 4 years, and we got there, and they had shipped all of our bass drums and all of our harnesses for every drum to Florida, and
Awesome.
we landed in London, and so when it was time for the parade, actually I went and borrowed some bass drums from Texas. They were over there, Texas University, that is, and I got all of our luggage straps and taught our snare players how to play with straps and tied one of the lugs to their leg, and just because I have the knowledge of being an old guy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's how come you know from traditional grip, because you're an old guy. In fact, when I marched with the VK in '77, that was a really pivotal year where drum corps were just starting to switch over to match grip, and we played half our show traditional and then half match. We were cutting edge. We're like, we're going to show you we can do both, because people older than me didn't learn to play match grip. In fact, there was something else super revolutionary that happened in this country about 1963 or 64 that encouraged people to play match grip. You want to guess what it is, Dan?
63 or 64. Was it Ringo Starr?
Yeah, ding, 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 ding. Yeah, his appearance on Ed Sullivan Show, and he was playing that super swingy hi-hat.
That sloppy hi-hat.
Yeah, and was playing match grip, and people were like, wait a minute, that doesn't look like Gene Krupa at all, and guys just played that way.
His feel is really deceiving if you don't study what he does. I did a surf band with Rusty and Brad for a while.
Yeah.
And I actually started listening to that stuff intently.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. He has great nuance to his playing, actually.
Yep. Yeah, it is. I listened to the Beatles channel on Sirius XM, who didn't pay me a nickel to say that. But that's one of the channels I listen to, and hearing his whole catalog, hearing his evolution through just a relative short period of time, just of under 10 years maybe, that they were recording, is really quite dramatic. I mean, a lot of their early stuff was very sort of swingy and shuffly, and and they got pretty deep into some hard rock psychedelica by the time they were done recording as a group, and it was really awesome. I know that they also pioneered a lot of cool recording techniques as well along the way. The recording gear itself was evolving during that time, and they were way out in the front experimenting with it, and inspired a lot of groups to do the same thing.
Absolutely. Now, one thing we didn't talk about on our previous interview were who were your drum set teachers?
It's a very short list. From a distance, my father, I say from a distance because we never really sat down and he never said, this is how you do this or that. My dad was a fireman. He was the fire marshal in the city of Orange when I was growing up, and but had a band. He played drums, always had played drums. As a kid, played the drums. But in the 60s, a lot of your listeners will know that the Firehouse Five and later Firehouse 5+2 were a popular group. And because my dad was a fireman, that really irked him. When he found out that they weren't actually firemen, that's what it was. When he found out that they weren't actually firemen, he wanted to put a band together. So in the early 60s, he had a band called the Hook and Ladder Lads. And the Hook and Ladder Lads played, weekend gigs. And so as a young person, a very young person in the early 60s, my mom would take us to see my dad do, whatever the gigs were, working a pizza parlor. In fact, there's a place down on Coast Highway in Corona del Mar. Well, actually, it's South Newport. There's a storefront there that has this, it's got a sign that protrudes out over the sidewalk and goes up real high. And it's been several stores over the years, but I remember as a kid, that marquee was a pizza joint that my dad played at. And they used to play Keystone Cops loops on the wall. They would just, it was really cool. They would just project black and white Keystone Cop movies just running on the wall.
Moving wallpaper, yeah.
Yeah, it was really funny. But anyway, so he clearly was an influence just watching him play, and then I was very fortunate to come through a public school system where there was music from elementary school on, and so there was a teacher, my elementary school teacher, whose name I can't remember, but he was a really kind and patient guy and fun to play for, and I don't remember his name. And then I joined the Squires Drum and Bugle Corps, like when I was 10, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and played through junior high. So I had that formal training, but not drum set training. And I'm trying to think when my first actual drum set teacher, I was teaching drum set at Frontier Music in Orange when I was in high school, and hadn't really taken a drum set lesson at that point. But it wasn't until college when I played at Fullerton College where I was exposed to young students. Well, actually before then, I did 2 summers at the Stan Kenton workshops, the years, maybe 75 and 76. It was the last 2 years he was at Orange Coast College. The Kenton band would come into the summer. And so we'd get to study with those drummers. And their names escape me. One guy's name was Cummings. And then there's another guy, I actually see him on Facebook and I can't think of his name now. But anyway, so
It's
just
okay, yeah.
like clinic kind of exposure. And then I'd always go to the Louis Bellson clinics in high school. And Roy Burns actually. Roy Burns, who we just lost a couple of years ago, really the last of the big band drummers. He was playing with, I think he played with Benny Goodman, but then he played with Lionel Hampton after all the other bands had disbanded. And I say last of the big band drummers. He was the last of that generation.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah. And he was giving clinics. So I was definitely seeing professionals give, condensed conceptual lessons through high school, but no private teacher. And then when I got to college, I was saying I was exposed to other drummers my age who were really good, and studying privately, was an obvious thing. And I studied with Chuck Flores.
Okay.
Chuck Flores lived in LA and was a studio drummer and had a modern jazz group called Fluoroscope, and was a very popular modern jazz drummer. Yeah. And then I think that was really the last person that I really studied with. But I wasn't living in a cave. I mean, I was absorbing everything I could.
Sure.
Playing drums, I mean, I often say to my other instrumentalist friends, Mark Massey and I were having this conversation the other day. Mark Massey, one of the most brilliant minds, along with being a brilliant musician, has taken up drumming. It's just been something he's been interested in doing. And I always tell him, drumming is easy. You can look at a drummer and figure out what they're doing. I mean, it's, you can, if you've never played the drums.
I understand. Sure.
Yeah, you can see it visually. You can watch a trumpeter do this all day long and not know what those combinations are and never figure that out, or any kind of horn player.
Right, or what's happening up here. Yeah.
Guitar player. Yeah, there's so many subtleties, as well as the code of the combinations. You'll never figure that out. But drums, you can look at and go, okay, I see what he's doing. So I was just absorbing it that way. And then once you can make the connection between what you see and how to do it, then you can hear music and make the connection. And I'll tell you a funny story. Not only I'll tell you a story that reinforces that concept. If you can hear it, you can figure out how to play it. There's a wonderful percussionist. His name is Trilok Gurtu, and he is trained in classical, or that is classic Indian percussion. He plays tabla, and he grew up somewhere in India, I guess. But anyway, Indian percussionist. And as a young person, he was hearing pop music, Western pop music, and could hear the rhythms and understood how the drums worked in relationship to the music. But because he was trained as a classic Indian percussionist, he sat on the ground and sat with one foot tucked up underneath his butt, and he was hearing these sounds. And so he created patterns that if you hear him play, he sounds like the most badass fusion drummer on the planet, and he is. But when you see him, you realize he's playing both the bass drum, snare drum, and all the tom parts with one hand. He's playing the bass, snare, bass, snare, as opposed to foot, hand, foot, hand. And then he's playing the cymbals with just one hand. So it's a very unorthodox, very unusual, visually, compared to what we normally think of as a drummer playing a conventional Western drum set.
Sure.
But musically, it's completely off the charts, wonderful, inspirational, and technically super difficult. But it's all a result of his percussion knowledge and him hearing a new kind of music without seeing it. So anyway.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure to look that up.
Trilok Gurtu, good luck with the spelling, but it's pretty much phonetic.
It also fascinates me how in that style of the actual drumming, the tabla drumming and stuff, the fact that they've come up with a vocalization of their,
yeah,
because it's brilliant that you can actually, one thing we always run up against, or at least I always run up against, is trying to explain a rhythm, and I've kind of developed Darjadat lingo,
Right.
but it's never accurate. And they've actually come up with phonetics that accurately show where the hits are and things.
Well, it's older than Western music, that's for sure. And there's also a counting. There's also a counting pattern that's based on the knuckles of your finger, which is also ingenious, which I haven't studied, none of which I've studied. And I have colleagues who are very, very knowledgeable in
Huh.
that particular discipline. And yeah, it's very fascinating.
It's also always fascinated me, but I'm not disciplined enough to learn it. So there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I
If
mean,
I'm, I'm sorry, if I'm a mom and I'm watching this or being referred to this interview, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I want to buy my son a drum set or daughter,
yeah.
is it possible for them to play anything on any drum set? I mean, what's a good drum set to introduce a kid to as far as sizes and sounds and shapes?
Well, it depends on the kid. And if you're talking about a 6-year-old,
No, let's say junior high age.
oh, okay, yeah, junior high age, you just, conventional drum set. Um, it's a longer conversation,
I understand.
but you can get away with a conventional drum set. There's a couple of things that have happened in regards to the evolution of the drum set, and there are so many choices now. But one thing that's happened is that toms in the 70s became longer, and so now there are choices of tom depth, and the only reason I'm bringing that up,
No, I understand.
well, that along with somehow the standard dimension of a bass drum has become 22 inches. When you buy what they call a shell pack, which is just the entry level drums from a big box or a catalog store, the ones that are super competitively priced, they'll have a 22-inch bass drum, which is a tall bass drum. Then you put on top of that a longer tom, and that creates a tall profile. So if you are a person of average or below average height, that can create a challenge for a young student. Also, if I'm teaching them match grip, a traditional grip, you can that you can have the snare drum higher on your body.
Okay.
But with match grip, if you have a drum that's high, you got to have your elbows kind of up high in the air. So I will give them size suggestions, that is drum size suggestions. And nobody needs a 22-inch bass drum if they're putting it in their bedroom to practice.
No, I understand.
So smaller size drums, specifically an 18-inch bass drum. And I have consulted with some of our band director friends that asked me the very same question. I want to buy a drum set for the classroom. What do I need? And I'll tell them to buy a kit with a 20-inch bass drum, which is considered small by today's standards. But what happens is when you get a drum bigger than that, now you gotta muffle the bass drum. So you stick a pillow or a blanket or something in there, and then it looks like you've got a load of laundry, in your bass drum. And what that does is that cancels the low frequencies. Boy, are we nerding out. I'm watching your listeners.
This is exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, you want a bass drum on a kit should have some resonance and a slight duration and decay.
Yeah, I see these high schools that buy 24,
Yeah, right.
22 bass drums, and then they cut a mic hole in the head, not knowing what that hole is for.
Yeah. Right. And actually 24-inch bass drum set up the right way sounds awesome with either what we call a big band or a rock band. Sounds
Right.
awesome. But it's like a Ferrari. It has to be set up properly in order to perform in control, because if you don't control it, it becomes this unwieldy thing. but the control is done um, with head combinations and strategic muffling, which takes a little bit of instruction. And so instead, what people do is they just toss a blanket in there. So what that does is it cancels the low frequencies. So you lose the whole advantage of having a tall drum, because now that large head is giving you a low frequency, a low fundamental, and you want that low fundamental. So you don't want to eliminate that while trying to make it quiet. So there's a couple of different ways of uh, reducing the volume without losing the low frequency. But when you stick a pillow or a blanket in there, now all you're hearing is the hard beater on the Mylar head. So you're hearing a lot of attack and not that low fundamental, which is really desirable in any kind of musical setting. You want that bass drum to live in that low frequency.
Yeah, of course, kind of when you and I, although I'm much older than you are,
You're
when
not
you and I were
much
coming
older.
up, the trend for a long time was to just take the bottom head off.
Yeah.
It has to do with actually kind of fads also, as far as
Yeah. There's definitely periods of time when, rock guys in the '60s took the front head off of the bass drum just because it was louder. They weren't miking the drums on stage, and amplifiers were getting more and more efficient, and so they would just take the front head off completely. That whole cutting a whole thing was sort of I think I don't know the proper term. Anyway, it was a more focused way of doing what they had done, just taking the front head off. You take the front head off, you lose the lugs, you lose the look of the drum. Now, instead of having it off the ground, now the front of it's clunked down on the front of the ground, and and again, you also lose the resonance. That drum is you're not getting the sympathetic vibration between the two heads anymore. Now it's just the sound is going in one direction. And if, like, you're playing outdoors, for instance, it's like playing in outer space.
yeah.
There's the sound doesn't last for very long.
Now, for that short time in high school when I was playing set, of course, I knew nothing about any of this, and I was just piecemealing together uh, a drum set. Actually, I ended up borrowing Gary Halapoff's brothers because
Yeah,
he had a nice Blue Ludwig set.
cool.
And but as far as school was concerned, not only I, I guess the question I'm getting around to. Sorry, Matt, for
Sorry.
my brain, but it must drive you crazy when you come into a school system that you're helping, and you see marching crash cymbals on the set.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what
Well,
what would be what's a good cymbal set to recommend for, say, the high school level for
yeah.
all
So if
around it?
I walk into a classroom and there's, like you say, the either the Piatti crash cymbals or the gear isn't appropriate for the setting, it could be a result of they just don't have the resources, right? And 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 if they do have the resources, then you just give them a little bit of feedback and direction, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes they're open to it, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they just don't know. Um, just like when you walk into a band and the drums are sitting 8 feet, off to one side, and the director's maybe never seen an ensemble, or doesn't realize that they might benefit by putting the drums a little closer to the band. Anyway, so sometimes a little direction can help. But to your question, a lot of both the drums and the cymbal manufacturers over the years have gotten very good about marketing their stuff. They've also expanded their lines by figuring out ways to make their products more cheaply. So every major cymbal manufacturer has an entry level cymbal that's cymbal making is a marvelous um, craft, and the people who do it are true artisans, and there's a lot of uh, man hours that go into uh, making the upper end professional cymbals. But you can also make cheap cymbals by just stamping them
Right.
out, you know. So it depends on their it depends on one's financial resources. You know, you can buy a cymbal pack for less than a couple $100, and but they're stamped cymbals. They're usually a heavy gauge, some kind of rolled product, as opposed to the professional cymbals, which are poured with molten bronze,
Right.
and they're
And
hand
spun.
hammered, and they're spun on a lathe, and there's a whole lot of different stuff that goes on. Um, but then you can do a lot with that, with an inexpensive cymbal, and then you need to consider your drumstick choice, because different sticks sound differently on different cymbals.
Actually, that was another question I was going to ask you. Say you're an aspiring drummer at a high school level.
Yeah,
What's in your stick bag?
in my stick bag,
No,
or
no. If you were to buy a stick bag and fill it with what a high school student needs
yeah,
to be a versatile drummer, what would they
yeah.
fill it with?
Well, a versatile drummer, you need to be more specific, because if it's a drum set drummer, you know, it's a stick that's somewhere between a 7A and a 5B, and there's myriad choices
Yeah.
and a handful of drumstick manufacturers
But
that
just in general, and
have a little.
you can shoot me down for this if I'm incorrect, but my high school guys that play everything, playing marching or playing set or playing
Yeah, yeah,
whatever we have,
yeah.
I insist that they have a set of 7As, a set of 5Bs, and a set of then was 2Bs.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. So that, and I'll see that in my kids, if they, um,
and mallets.
recently, I say recently, there has been a trend from I don't know when, but because winter guard and winter drumline have become such a popular thing, they do it in the spring, which can be a direct conflict with the jazz festivals. So for the top set drummers, a lot of them can't participate in the indoor drumline stuff. And now drum set has become a specialty within an indoor drum line. So a lot of kids are having to choose. But yeah, to have a marching stick, and maybe even tenor mallets, depending on what the kids are interested in. And of course, on the drum set, you utilize soft mallets. So in my bag, I have two different kinds of brushes, and I have a particular drumstick that I play by Vic Firth, which is called an AJ3. That stands for American Jazz, and they have a 1 through 5, I think, and mine's kind of right down the middle. That would be the Matt Johnson signature stick, the AJ3. And then I have a pair of medium timpani mallets, because I use mallets on the kit. Um, and then I have a jingle stick, a thing that's kind of like a tambourine, but you hold it in your hand, and it's kind of a fun thing.
You probably have a set of hot rods too.
I have a couple of rods. In fact, I don't even have a pair. I have two different kinds, and that is, I have one. I have two that are different, and because I actually don't like playing them. You know, if somebody goes, play rods on this, and it usually means a pop tune, and they want a pop kind of feel, but they want it quiet. I'm like, I'll just play softly. I'll just play really softly. But it depends what the musical situation is. When I consider, well, anyway, did that cover what a high schooler should have in there?
Yes, sir.
You know, they should have an appropriate drum set stick. They should have brushes if they're playing in a jazz band, and
well, you know, very seldom do I see brush technique being taught anymore.
yeah, well, it's certainly not taught by a general music teacher, but you know, it's definitely a dying art. but there are people that do it masterfully. And in fact, in the book that I'm writing, one of the there's a play along component to the book, and which requires brushes in one instance and a couple of instances. And I have a whole clinic on brushes, and I have a couple of handouts on brushes, but I just chose not even to go into it in this book. I'm like, if you can play brushes, awesome. If you can't, just go online, and there are myriad players demonstrating great stuff. And again, back to one of our original points, it's so much easier I think, for a young musician who's actually has interest to see somebody doing something and go, okay, I see what that is. I'm going to break that down. I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to practice one side and then the other. I can do that, as opposed to me giving a handout and go, interpret this. Look at this two-dimensional thing, and then, interpret it into not only a three-dimensional thing, but a thing that involves four-way independence. I mean, it's just easier to see it.
Yep.
And or narrate what somebody's doing. So
Once I brought a drummer down from my school to see you play down at Steamers,
yeah,
and he's now the drummer with the Half Past Two and a few other ska bands,
okay, awesome.
which is neat. But and that was another case of I thought it was important for him to see somebody doing the craft.
Yeah.
What do you tell your students who come up to you that say I want to be a professional? That's what I want to do for a living. What do
Yeah.
you tell them?
I ask them if drumming weren't an option, what else would you do? And if they can come up with any other kind of thing, or they go like, my dad owns my dad owns this other business, and there's a family business. Or they'll say, well, I also like science a lot, maybe I'd be a teacher, but so what if they come up with any other answer, I tell them to do that.
Yes.
Because you can always play drums. You can always play drums, and you can always find a way to play drums. When they say, I want to play drums for a living, now we got to have a really serious conversation about, and I really think it's sort of the dirty secret of higher education. And that is to say, you want to play drums for a living? Let's talk about the actual market for that, and what the opportunities are, and what kind of music are you interested in, and of course eventually I'd have to hear them play. My friend Joe Jewell used to say, if he's a guitarist,
Yes. Okay.
and he would say, if guitar is the first thing you think about in the morning and the last thing you think about before you go to bed, then maybe, depending on how hard you work, you might be able to actually pursue this. But which isn't to say that someone shouldn't pursue music for the personal enrichment. That is a joy and an energy that can't be quantified, and it can enrich an otherwise well-rounded life. But I'm sorry, I'm kind of dancing around your question.
No, it's okay.
I want to be a professional drummer. Well, let's hear you play. Where do you see yourself? What kinds of, because if they go, I just want to just be on a big stage. Well, I mean, you definitely need to have a dream and a vision. And then we have to figure out how we can create steps in order for you to arrive there. I mean, back to one of my earlier comments, is playing drums is easy, and it amazes me how some of the best drummers I've seen, personally, the best drummers, that is, I know people who are arguably some of the best drummers in the world, and they can't, string two jobs together. And it's has nothing to do with their ability, or their conviction, or their earnest pursuit of work. It just happens to be the work that's available.
Yeah.
And yet, on the other end of the spectrum, I see guys that can barely hold drumsticks and who have become wildly popular with bands. And so it kind of almost doesn't have to do anything with how well you can play. So if you want to play music for a living, you have to come to terms with what limited resources there are. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I tell drummers who go through my program and they go, well, I've done all this, and now what do I do? I say you have to collaborate. You have to find other like-minded individuals, and you've referenced Steamers several times. Steamers, that for 20 years was just around the corner from Fullerton College, they always had ongoing jam sessions, and I would make it a part of my program, and so did some of the other instrumental instructors, to say you need to go, and even if you don't sign up, I had a whole handout on how to do it. If you don't sign up, you still need to approach somebody who did play and introduce yourself and tell them what you thought of their playing and ask them what their influences are. And the whole point being to start a conversation that could possibly lead to a relationship. So much about what you and I have done over the years has been a result of personal relationships with other instrumentalists who wanted to do the same thing we did, perform at a high level, entertain people, and have fun while we're doing it, and make some money at the same time. So you have to actually meet people to do it. So I tell my students, seek out people that inspire you. So if you go to that jam session and you see a guitarist or a bass player or a singer or a sax player, piano player that inspires you, introduce yourself, tell them that you appreciated their performance, find out what kind of music interests them, share your influences and ideas about projects with them, try and begin to play together and create a relationship so you can create something, well, envision it, create it, try and find a way to play in public and or produce some kind of music that can be, today people have bands and they never play in public. They're just producing the music and putting it out on the interweb, and document it before everybody ends up hating one another. Because that's the life cycle of a band. There's an idea and there's a collaboration, and then there's this journey, which is hopefully an upward, trajectory of performance and presence, and then eventually, I say, until everybody hates one another. What ends up happening is what began as a common interest between co-conspirators, sometimes people's interests wane, or sometimes there can be a power struggle. And just like the personal relationship that started the venture, it's the personal relationships that usually terminate the venture. So as a non-songwriting drummer, I have always found success through collaboration, and they've been genuine collaborations with some super talented people who have who've not only inspired me, but they have also appreciated my presence in their musical venture, and we've just sort of ridden it out together. And I have people that I've worked with for 40 years off and on for that very reason. So,
Speaking of people you've worked with for 40 years off and on,
yes.
My next interview today is Tom Kubis.
Well, now here I've alluded to a book that I'm writing, and it is in conjunction with Tom Kubis. So I have chosen not to let it out of the bag, but I will tell you that Tom has been instrumental, no pun intended, but he has been a central part in fact, to an overwhelming degree of this project that I'm doing that I, again, am just weeks away from completing. I'm projecting weeks away from completing. I don't have a deadline. I'm self-publishing it, so nobody's on my back. But Kubas, it's been a big part of that. I was the original drummer in the Tom Kubas Big Band, and we played together in the Jazz Minors at Disneyland together. I love Tom and I love his music. And I believe I describe him sometimes as one of the most prolific writers of big band literature. He may be the most prolific writer, certainly in this country, and there are many who are writing really quality stuff. Sammy Nestico is still alive, for goodness sakes. I mean,
But Tom is so fast.
Tom is so fast. A quick, do I have time for a
And
quick
excellent.
Tom Kubas story?
You got about, he's going to be on in about 6 minutes.
Okay, all right. So early in our relationship, Tom would bring his oldest son to my house for
John,
drum set. Not John,
Oh,
Eric, I believe is his name. That was Linda. Anyway, it's all personal stuff. Anyway,
Yeah,
he'd bring his kid to my house for a drum set lesson, and he'd bring a score pad, blank score pad. And within 1 hour of our lesson, and he'd turn on the baseball game. If there's a baseball game on, he'd turn on the Angels game. So now the Angel game is going, and I'm playing drum set, and even worse, his kid is playing drums in the room next to him. And at the end of the lesson, I come out, and he has, from zero, written a full chart, big band chart, fully realized, no piano, no musical instrument to help him, written it out longhand on score paper, so he could do a chart in 1 hour. When we were with the Jazz Minors, he would write on a piece of manuscript paper. He would write on one line. Well, he'd write this thing out, and then he would tear each little line, and he would hand it to each guy. And what he had written was a shout chorus for each one of the guys. Or he arranged a shout chorus, and he goes, when we go back down there and we play, Darktown Strutter's Ball, after the bass solo, everybody play this. And so the guys would just kind of shed their part there for a second, and we go down. So he wrote on a 15-minute break a shout chorus to a song, and then we'd go down and perform it. Anyway, funny. Tom is a truly genius guy. But go ahead.
no, I was just going to say thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome, Dan. I appreciate you having me back. It only seems like just last week we were talking here.
I know, it's amazing, and there may be more in the future if you don't mind.
Okay, no.
We cover a lot of good ground and important information for people, and I appreciate it.
I hope it didn't bore them, and I will invite anybody who is still watching, if they go to drummermattjohnson.com, you can reach out to me via my website, drummermattjohnson.com. In fact, I was thinking earlier, I wrote for a music educators conference a whole list of gear, from drums to as specific as like drum head combinations and sticks and cymbals. And I have it on one easy sheet if somebody's interested, but for any other resource reason, reach out to me and say, hey, and
Well, great. I'm going to refer people to that. Once again, that's incredible. Matt Johnson, say the address again, for your
drummermattjohnson.com. And that's where my book will be when it's released. But mention to Kubas that I didn't tell you much about it because I don't want to jinx it.
Okay, I'll do that.
Kubas will just tell. Well, you know what? Kubas may just tell you what it is, but
Maybe I should try and get it out of him.
no.
No, I'm kidding.
Only because I'd want him to describe it really well. But we're enjoying this collaboration, and he has provided so much input, and he's waiting on me to do my part.
Yep, he's waiting on me right now.
Okay, all right. Hey, tell him I said hey.
Matt, I love you as always.
Right back, Danny. I'll look forward to the next time we talk.
Great. Bye-bye.
Peace.
Thank you for watching Trad Jazz Today. Dan shows new interviews every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Make sure to check out the archive of past shows and please give us a thumbs up when you subscribe to the channel. Bye.